welcome along tonight, everybody. And you'll see when you jump in that I think your videos are automatically off, but feel free to pop those on. It's really nice to see smiley faces. Means Conrad just isn't talking to a whole lot of names. But we have kept your microphones muted just to make sure we don't have background noise, so we can clearly hear what our guest speaker has to say this evening. Any questions or comments you have along the way, drop them in the chat. And I can help sort of filter those through as and when. Welcome along to the second webinar in our Fit for Farming series. This is on fueling the farmer. I'm not sure, I haven't kept track actually if the people attending tonight are the same people who attended last week, but for a little bit of background there, I am Becks Smith. I'm founder of The Whole Story, and we're really focused on inspiring sustainability and empowering farmers. I have a guest with me this evening. This is Jackie Eshelman. She's all the way over from Oregon in the States. She's been working with us at The Whole Story here on our farm this week. So she is just joining us this evening to have a listen in and see what we all have to say. But most importantly, we want to introduce Conrad. So this is Conrad Goodhew. Conrad is an accredited sports dietitian, and really, I think how I wanted to introduce Conrad is I heard you speak, and I don't even know how many years ago that was, but Conrad spoke at a Rural Women's event in the Becks Hall and spoke about, I guess, fueling ourselves, and gave me a bit of background understanding about that, and even thinking about that from the context of farming and how farmers eat and their dietary habits, and how that may or may not be resulting in performance outcomes. And that's changed the way that I think about food and how we fuel ourselves. So he was just an obvious choice for me when I was thinking about someone to talk about fueling the farmer, something that I don't think we spend enough time thinking about, because at the end of the day, if we're not fueled right, then we can't actually get the job done. And it makes such a difference to our mental health, our physical health, and our overall lives. So that's the background as to why Conrad's here with us this evening. We also have to thank our sponsor, Beef and Lamb New Zealand, specifically the Southern South Island and Central South Island regions, because they came to the party with financial backing for this. So thank you so much to them. And I think that is all of the housekeeping here. So without further ado, nobody wants to hear from me anymore. Let's pass it over to Conrad. Thank you, Conrad.
I don't mind. I was enjoying listening, chipping away listening there. So, hey, no, thanks for that introduction. And yeah, that was very interesting times. Was it 2021 or might have been end of 2020? I don't know. It's in all sort of that after COVID sort of time, and it was a very chaotic. I think it was one of my first events in person for a long time, so I really enjoyed getting all the way out there and doing that. So lots changed too. I think we've mentioned that, and I think, and this is me growing and presenting, and also I guess what we learn, and this is, I think, with nutrition we're constantly evolving. So it's not ensuring that we overhaul everything or drastically change anything. It's just about, I guess, keeping your finger on the pulse. And big thing that I talk to, I guess, my clients and my athletes and everyone else in between, is that if we're not growing, we're dying. So if we're not learning, we're not growing in all aspects, then I think we can kind of go backwards. So it's really key that we continue to think we don't know it all. It's all about growth and development. So really, very quick background for me. I am a registered dietitian, and I actually am from the far north. So Whangarei, well, we don't consider it the far north, but down south, you consider it the far north. And that's a little place, we're a rural community just outside of there. And I sort of grew up on quite a large sort of lifestyle block, you could call it, where Dad sort of farmed, I guess, sheep and cattle for a very small amount, but also owned a building company up there at the time. And sort of what took me to university was actually to do veterinary, funny enough. But all that changed when I was sort of chasing my rugby hopes and dreams in big old Palmerston North. The big smoke is what I thought. But then realised sort of nutrition was my passion, and I decided to pursue, I guess, sport nutrition. And that's what took me down to Otago and studied dietetics. So that's sort of, I guess, my sort of very brief background, but a lot of learnings a lot of things that we hear, especially in the nutrition space, and when I did study in Otago, was you get a lot of, I guess, and this is very much not trying to be sexist here at all, but very much your female private school girl is very much interested in interested in nutrition. That'd be, I'd say, 75% of the class that they lost that connection with, I guess, the rural community in particular, but also just like how we live in New Zealand at times as well. So um, I had a big perspective in, I guess, our understanding from a higher level. So a lot of my work I do now is I do work with professional rugby teams still. I also work with professional cricket here. But in terms of my practice and I think the bigger picture stuff, I actually am trying to do a lot of work with Dietitians New Zealand in terms of changing the way we look at nutrition and what we actually deliver. Because I think we can get too caught up in the numbers and the negative stuff within, I guess, are we doing it right? Should we be doing this? We got, doctors saying X, Y, and Z, but we're kind of losing that foundation of just, hey, we actually have really good base nutrition. It's just about sort of tightening that up and kind of simplifying it. So a big thing that I work on is let's not overcomplicate this nutrition thing. So at any time throughout this, please drop your questions. But if there's anything that doesn't make sense, please let me know, because I'm sure if it doesn't make sense to you, someone else won't understand it either. But that's enough for me talking about myself and what I do. I'm really interested in sort of, I guess, this is what we're going to touch on today. So a big part of what I talk about is nutrition being a behavior more so than an algorithm. So I'll give you a bit of an understanding on what that looks like and about habit creation, etc. And a big connection is, and you'll learn about this too, is stress and sleep and the connection that has with food and nutrition. And it touched on alcohol there a little bit as well. But the big one for me, and particularly for farmers, is understanding, metabolism. What is metabolism? What is energy? What does that look like? And especially what our energy needs are to know how much we need to have, really. And then we work on this sort of like food groups and plate models, I guess, prescription, that we'll sort of learn about how much do we need to have and how do we actually manage our day. So we'll touch on that. And of course, monitoring, reflection, and adaptation, which I'll touch on at the end too. So that's kind of what we wanted to touch on in this talk today. So what I mean by nutrition as a behavior, again, it comes from, I guess, and the reason you're probably sitting in here is because you're actually interested in food and interested in nutrition, where a lot of people think about nutrition as being like how many grams of protein we need to have, what electrolytes we should be taking, should we be taking creatine? Because I know that's getting smashed on social media at the moment. Well, actually, nutrition is actually about the habits that we work on. So it's I guess nutrition or dietetic delivery is very much almost a psychology or a counseling in a way, but it's trying to, I guess, navigate that food element and try to teach you what that is. And people often come to me expecting a food plan or like a meal, or like some recipe options and all the rest of it. But it's like we're missing the big picture here of actually how do we apply that knowledge. So when we're thinking about, I guess, nutrition, when my cursor comes up, being a behavior, it sits in between the two of them. Okay. So it's not only the what, but it's the how. And I'm going to really push that or drive that message home today. So when it comes to, I guess, the stages of change, and this is actually a big part of my learnings as a dietitian through my studies as well as ongoing. And this is what I talk to a lot of my students about is this process of change and habit creation. The reason why I'm knuckling this down, and I guess for a lot of people that I work with, when they go to, I guess, they might go to a personal trainer, they might go to the doctor, they might go to the physio or whatever that may look like. They're often getting like something tangible, whether it be a service or get your haircut, for example. You're still getting a tangible service. But unfortunately for nutrition, it's actually about, you've got to go home and do it yourself. We're just really sitting there and giving you advice. So a big part of what we have to do is actually try to change the behavior of the habits that you create. So I'm going to walk you through this thing called the stages of change model. There's lots of different psychology behind this in terms of motivational interviewing, but a big part of this is actually how do we change, I guess, the habits that we make and what is the process within that? A lot of people come to me, they go, I should just do it. Well, it doesn't quite work like that. There's actually a lot of steps that happen before you're thinking about doing it and actually doing it. So the first step is what we call the pre-contemplation stage. So what that means is you don't actually know there is an issue at hand. Okay, so in food, it might be that, oh, I don't know how many vegetables I need to eat, for example. I'm just going to bang this drum for this example, but I don't know how many vegetables I need to have, so I don't know like if I'm actually hitting enough. But then what you do is we start to go, right, actually I need to be having 5+ of veggies per day, so I'm aware that there's a problem, but then I'm not willing to make that change yet. So what we've got to do is actually start to find strategies and processes to actually make that change. And that's where it takes us to that preparation stage. So we go, right, okay, what can you do to prepare what you need to do? So that might be getting more planned, to be making sure that you've got the right things in the cupboard, or if you've got backup options in the freezer, you start to actually prepare to eat enough veggies. Then it's the action stage. Then it's you actually physically putting that veggie in my mouth, and then you start to do that over and over again, and that leaves you in that maintenance point there. So then what this does in terms of this process is there are actually a lot of things that happen before we just need to put that veggie in our mouth. And I think this is a big part of us, especially when we're working with, family members or whether it be immediately or outside of that, is when we're trying to help help a person, sometimes it's you just need to make that change. Well, actually, it's how do we help them make that change? And you can also think inwards in managing that as well. But the number one thing in this model is this relapse. And people come to me, I've fallen off the wagon. Well, guess what? What if there wasn't a wagon to fall off? So the whole process of this is like the relapse phase is actually the learning process. It's failing forward, which will take me to my next slide. Which is this paper that looked at how habit creations are, how habits are formed, and this specifically looked at, I guess, how long it took, but also the processes that were part of that. So I'm not going to sort of bore you with this too much, but what they found in this paper, on average, it took people 66 days to create a habit, but here it says the range is large, 18 to 254 days to create a habit, which is huge. But the number one thing that this paper represents is that just because you fail didn't mean you ended up getting to that habit. So with all the stuff, whether it be the physio, whether it be the mental skills, whether it be the physical element, and all the nutrition, number one thing is failure is part of the process. So an example that I like to do, and being brought up in that rural community, we were far away from the local dairy or Uber Eats or anything like that a lot of the city folk have, and that's me now, living in the middle of Christchurch, we have access to now, is actually we had to learn how to cook. And what happened is I burnt the potatoes so many times. I boiled the potatoes dry as a young man. This was about sort of 10 years old. But what happened is I keep doing it, and obviously keep getting told off by mum and dad, stop wrecking our pots. But what actually happened is now I don't actually burn that potato anymore, because I've realized that actually those are the processes and habits that I put in place. Have I been close recently? Yep. But I've also recognized, and that's that thing that's part of it. So these are things that we accidentally do as well in terms of failure, but we can't get caught up with that as well. So whatever it may be, whether it be trying to make new recipes, trying to eat differently, try new foods, whatever it be, just keep at it, because it will get there in time. So if you can take anything away, I think most of you will probably know how to eat relatively well. It's the stuff that you really need to focus on and manage moving forward. So at the end, we'll come and look at some strategies of how we create these behaviors and these habits, and some simple tips and tricks. Cool. All right. I'm not going to touch on that too much. I'll just leave that for now. Now, I want to, a big part of, I guess, nutrition is actually, no, I will touch on this because I think this is important. So going beyond that algorithm and talking about it being the behavior, that's sort of that section there. The mental skills part of that as well. And the reason why we look at, I guess, what influences our nutrition or you as an individual is mental skills. So it's like how you feel about food, but also good food will make you feel good too. And that ends up being a positive cycle there as well. The other section here is our community. And when I say community or environment, I don't necessarily mean nature. I mean, like, okay, who's in your household, who's in your social groups, who are you surrounding yourself with? That's either going to influence you, or how are you going to influence it in terms of what you want to achieve in the nutrition space. Okay. So we'll touch a bit more on the algorithm. You've obviously touched on the mental fitness and the how we eat well and how we actually feel really good and fueling our minds. Then we look at how nutrition is a social connection. So it's like, I know hopefully this won't be too much this group, but there are people that I work with that, take the little boxed food to a barbecue, which we have to remove. We don't want that happening, because nutrition is very much a cultural piece with what we do. And I mean by that, by Kiwi culture. Okay. But last but not least is, I guess, sleep, stress, recovery, etc. Okay. And it comes down to sort of, I guess, the neural pathway, because it does affect our food and the way our food interacts with our body, but our food actually interacts with that and helps us sleep better and be less stressed and all these beautiful things as well. So that's what I want to dive into a little bit more in understanding, I guess, stress and how that impacts us, but how food can actually impact it. Okay, so when we're looking at, I guess, the stress systems and when I'm looking at when I'm working with individuals, we've got two, I guess, nervous systems or neural systems, and they work opposite each other. Okay, we've got the parasympathetic nervous system paralyzed. That means like rest and digest. So that's in our case, in our calm state. There are things you can do to activate that, but we do have to actively be in that calm state to manage the stress. I'm not going to dive too much in the psyche behind it, but it's this here that I want to really talk about is when we're in that sympathetic or that flight or flight response, stress response, what happens is it actually inhibits or impacts our gut and our interaction with our gut. So I get a lot of people that come to me and they say I'm intolerant to X, Y, and Z, or I'm having issues with my tummy, or I'm feeling nauseous, don't want to eat, appetite's low, or I'm tired, I'm fatigued, or I sleep poorly, whatever it may be. A lot of it comes down to the actual wiring within our body that goes, right, you're not ready to eat because there's a saber-toothed tiger at the end of the tunnel that's going to eat you. Okay. So it's like, this is really important when we're thinking about food. Again, it's like the how we eat part of it is, okay, are we sitting at the table and eating, food with our family? Are we eating in the car on the way because we're rushing to pick up the kids? Like what are these behaviors that we're doing to actually put ourselves in a calm state so our body can use the food that we give it and utilize it the best that we can? Okay. I think that's really important as part of this as well. A lot of people come to me, I've got this intolerance or I'm allergic to that. And yep, there are some clinical diagnosis, but we've got to make sure the stress is under control first and foremost to make sure we can manage that. And a lot of the time, we can actually help with stress too. But again, that's more of a personal conversation. So I'm not going to dive too much into this. Maybe we can have the slides. You can come back to that later. I think real basic stuff. We need to get 7 to 8 hours sleep. Going to bed and waking at the same time is really important. But there are some really cool things that you can do to manage, I guess, quality of sleep. And when you're tired, fatigued, you are going to make silly choices. Also, that neural wiring is starting to go, right, I'm stressed, and because I haven't slept very well, so I'm going to eat more. I'm probably going to choose things that are suboptimal for me. Or on the flip side, I'm just going to live off caffeine, and that's going to have a negative consequence, et cetera, et cetera. But a big thing I want to touch on now is alcohol. And I think this is something that I guess, are starting to learn a lot more about now with the wearables that we have and the impact that that can actually have on our body, and particularly how rested and recovered we are. So when we think of alcohol, there is definitely, I guess, the high calorie component of it. So it's actually yield. So per gram, it um, it contains more calories than what a carbohydrate does. Okay, that's meant to be, sorry, not 7 grams. That's meant to be 7 calories per gram. Remember that for later. But what it does is actually dehydrates the body and stresses the body. And now we're seeing things in like literally like 2 beers could actually impact the body in a negative way. And we've got to think about how that stresses the body too. But when it comes to Ministry of Health recommendations, there are still guidelines around, okay, you shouldn't have any more than sort of three to five drinks in a sitting. You should have less than, I think it's 12 to 15, alcoholic drinks or standard drinks per week. You can look online if you want to see those. But now the recommendations coming out that actually if you don't have to drink and actually zero alcohol is good. But I think it's also the how we're drinking, and it comes back to that social element too. There are times that we can drink and it's appropriate to drink, but it's making sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. And I think the big challenge is it's getting to the end of the day when you're tired, you're fatigued, you're not making good decisions, and you're trying to wind down with an alcoholic drink. That if you want a beer, there are non-alcoholic versions that are going to give you the same, I guess, feeling and sensation, because alcohol, you're kind of just adding stress to stress. I think that's really important in a way where we need to manage this too. But I just want to touch on some data. Sorry, when my cursor pops back up. Oops, wrong way. This way. So this is something I've just tracked. I'm not going to dive into the detail too much, but sorry, my cursor keeps disappearing on me. Ugh, here. So we've got seaweed the dip here. So over the week, this is this thing called HRV, and what it is tracking my stress score. Again, not going to dive into too much what that looks like, but it's showing me how much time I'm spending in my sympathetic nervous system, so that stress state. So you can see that over the week, this is Monday, we cruise down, it's in negative because I'm starting to, be stressed and managing people and getting all that. Get to Friday, I'm pretty tired and pretty fatigued. And then it's like often it'll be Friday night, I need a drink because I've had such a massive week. where this was actually Saturday, which I had, I think it was 3 beers or 3 standard drinks. And you can see how it absolutely plummeted my HRV. Now, sometimes it won't do that, but it depends on the cumulative stress that it happens on the day. So I think the big thing I want to get take away from this is alcohol is fine. Alcohol is a great option when it's in a social setting and you're having a drink with friends, or sometimes it loosens the lips for to have conversations that we may need to be had. But it's also ensuring that it's like we're not getting to the end of the day and we're just having alcohol because we think we need it, or we're not drinking properly and or enough water, we're not eating properly and we're tired, etc. Because what we're doing is we're stressing the body. Okay, and it impacts sleep, and then it impacts the next day, and then it has that lead on and roller coaster effect. So, and it could be simple things. I don't need you to go from from a lot to nothing. Okay, we don't need to go cold turkey. It could be little things like, hey, let's just not drink during the week. Start off with that, and you might start to integrate, okay, I'm going to go to this barbecue, and rather than taking a 6-pack of beers or 24-pack, whatever it looks like for you, it may be taking some zeros instead. And it's finding different ways and strategies that we have access to now to find better ways to go, right, do I need to do that? Because that's something that culturally has been ingrained for us for a very long time. Again, rural community, rugby player, student for 8 years, like I've been exposed to probably pretty poor drinking habits. So I'm not one to say no to a drink, but I think it's now understanding of the impact that it can have. And this is really good data that backs that as well. Cool. So that's stress. Sorry, I know I'm ripping through it because I know there's a lot of information to squeeze into a very small amount of time. However, I think this is a really important part to understand, I guess, the reason why I've got, I guess, energy, because this is what we're thinking with food, okay? And food is energy. It's I guess, a unit. Food is a unit of energy, or calories is a unit of energy. So we've just got to understand about what does that mean, and it comes back to this whole thing: calories in, calories out. That's what like weight gain, weight loss is, but there's so much more to it than just that. And I think it's about actually enhancing it rather than being scared of it. I think that's really crucial that I want to get at today. So if you could just mute, I think it's someone that's just unmuted. A couple of people there, if you could jump on there, that'd be great. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so let's talk through, I guess, what energy expenditure is. So again, like I said, it's a unit of energy that's just calories out. So the first section here is what we call our basal metabolic rate. So that is the minimum amount of energy that you need to survive. So if you're in a coma in bed, this would be what your body needs to keep it alive. Brain function, heart function, lung function, all those things to literally keep you alive. It's determined by muscle mass, height, weight. It's more muscle mass. Gender plays a part. A little bit of genetics. Age plays a part. Mostly things we can't control. It's kind of just what we've dealt with. Okay, and we're looking at generally ballpark. Like this here is an example of a day for me. So a training day would be 60-ish%. For a non-training, it could be closer to sort of 70% of the food that I take in is just to keep me alive in terms of energy expenditure. Then what we've got here is what we call the thermogenic effect of food, which is when you consume food, you need energy to break that food down and utilize it. Okay, it's just a placeholder. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it's just recognizing that there are, before we're even a functioning human being, we're looking at 75% of your energy needs, your calorie needs, are just to keep you alive. Okay, really important. So a lot of people that go, I'm not training and I'm not doing much, I need to stop eating. Well, are you just dropping it by a little bit, or are you dropping it by a lot? And that's a big question, but we'll talk about that soon. The next section here is what we call the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Big fancy word, but let's just think of it as neat. That's your step count in the day. That's how much you fidget, how much you talk, how much you think, whatever that may look like. So a big part of what influences that is your occupation. And that's obviously a big section of what we're going to touch on today and see the variability that I see with farmers, just to put some numbers and some context around how much change we can see with people that do work physical jobs. Okay. And obviously the last section there is eat, and that's not food. That's the energy expended from actually doing physical activity. We put on your running shoes, jump on the bike, in the boat, do a yoga session, whatever that looks like is what you would consider exercise. So these two sections can be highly variable. Are there ways to measure it? Yes, but they're pretty inaccurate. There's still nothing out there that I'm saying, hey, that's going to be great. But I think it's having the awareness of change that's really important here, and how do we reflect on that? So when we're looking at, I guess, changes in energy expenditure and I guess different exposure, and I'm going to use obviously farming as the example here of, I guess, what are some changes in numbers? And again, I've just used numbers for myself. I'm not a very tall person, so about 80 kilos, 170 centimeters. So, like my energy expenditure might be a bit lower than maybe some other men out there that are 100 clicks and 6 foot versus might be slightly more than some ladies, but it's not actually that much more, but it's these big changes that I want you to focus more about than the absolute numbers. But the absolute numbers is going to be an example now. Okay. If you get confused, let us know, but hey, this is all part of the learning. Where's my cursor gone? Oopsies. Here. All right. So we think about an office day. Okay. It's a day, even if it's just driving around after the kids or driving somewhere or sit in the office doing an admin day, whatever that may look like. Okay. So we've got this bottom thing here, the basal metabolic rate, and we're not actually doing too many steps. All right. So basal metabolic rate's about sort of 1950. Sort of a lady that might be a little bit smaller might be more 1700. It's actually a lot more than the 1200 calorie diets that people prescribe. I'm not going to go there. Ballpark there, and then you sort of times it by about 1.2, 1.4, and it gives me around about sort of 2425. Don't have to worry about the numbers, just concepts here. Okay, so let's say I did some training with that as well. That's going to end up being about 500 calories in addition to that. So we're looking about 2,900. Okay, cool. So that's a training day, office, not doing a lot, not doing too many steps. When we look at a light farm days, that might be more of just like walking, moving some cattle, sheep, whatever that may look like. You might be on the horse for an hour or so. Might be, I don't know, milking cows for a couple of hours. You have a relatively high step count. We're talking 15-ish thousand steps. So what happens is, in addition to our office day that we're thinking and then do that exercise, we're actually not, this is excluding exercise. This is no me doing a nice little yoga session on the mat in my lounge. I don't do that. That's something I probably should be doing. But you can see there that my actual energy needs are higher when I'm doing one of those days versus when I'm just in the office and exercise. A lot of people go, I'm not exercising, I'm not training, so I shouldn't be eating. Well, what are you doing in your day-to-day that's going to impact your, I guess, your farming and your or your energy output or your calorie needs? Okay. Then we go to, I guess, a bit busier farm day. That maybe I was looking at this for more of like a half day, walking around and half day driving, whereas this day might be more of a whole day walking around, possibly doing some fencing, whatever it is, more physical work. If you're really pushing the boat and you're getting there and on the chainsaw or doing something along those lines, I don't know what that looks like. But your energy expenditure is actually going to be quite significant. Let's say doing balers, for example, remember the days that we used to do 12, 14 hours of shifting, like flipping hay, like you're going to be up super, super high. And we wonder why we're so fatigued and tired and that sort of stuff at the end is because we've just got to understand the differences in our energy expenditure. So if we look at a day that you go, okay, I'm in the office and training versus, I guess, and this is a low busy day, we're talking around about sort of 800, probably a little bit 900-ish calories. Now, that's a decent sized meal, like difference. You would need to take in, that's you doing office day plus training versus a day that you might be a bit busier and walking around and let's say, you're pulling fences all day or what that may look like. Like I think it's understanding, okay, are we getting that meal in? I'll leave you with that, but I think it's understanding there are going to be quite big differences and we've got to recognize what that looks like in terms of our body's feedback, which takes me to this next slide called limited energy availability. And in the sporting context and specifically clinically, this is where we have, I guess, we have an increase. There's two ways this happens. We have an increase in our energy expenditure. So, i.e., we're busier in the day, we're doing more steps, we're more active, and we're not eating more. So, what that means is we've got to have the amount of, I guess, energy that's available for our body to do what it needs to do, i.e., heart, lungs, regeneration, digestive tract, all those things are compromised. Now, in the short term, that's not a major, but in the long term, that can cause severe health complications. And for athletes, we see things like stress fractures, chronic injury, chronic illness, etc. Okay. Now, if we look at this, it's the same thing as if someone had the same energy output and restricted their intake too much, i.e., went on a diet. We would see that same thing. So we've got to think about it like, yeah, you might not be, I'm not eating any less. Why am I feeling really gross? It's because you haven't recognized that you've been busier, you've had more output, you've done more steps, and you haven't actually actively eaten more. Okay. But there's something else that happens here as well. And this is where it gets really nasty in terms of what I see in clinic. When we get busier, what do? We often eat less. We're like, I just need to do this thing, or I just want to get through that. And then you get through that, and then suddenly you're too tired, then you're too fatigued, you don't want to eat. So then we get a double-edged sword happening. We have chronic undereating, which is accidental, not on purpose, coupled with increased output. And then we have this massive deficit where we see chronic things like frequent injuries, or you've got like a little niggle that isn't coming right, everything hurts, you're getting really tired, you're fatigued, you're sleeping really poorly, probably have some metabolic conditions as well. There's all these things that start to creep up, which is what a term that we actually call relative energy deficiency in sport. And guess what? I've seen it in farmers that don't even play sport. So it's like really important that we need to actually go, right, how much are we outputting to make sure that we're actually matching it for a standard day? Okay. And that's, I think, this is what I guess the calories in, calories out, to make sure that we are ensuring about what are we actually doing. I was going to note the study that came out as well in 2014, when this was more around people that underate and actually did fasting. I'm not saying this is for our group, but this is the other side of the coin. Is you have the chronic conditions. We've also got this thing where our body will actually actively slow down and conserve energy when we aren't feeding enough or maximizing that. So we will fidget less, we'll move less, we'll wouldn't train as well, all these things. So when I tell people, oh, you need to eat more, they freak out. They freak out. They go, right, why? Like, I'm going to put on weight because, when you eat more calories than you burn, you are going to put on weight. Which that is in people that might be more sedentary and probably have the cafe down the road and grab a coffee, like a scone with the coffee because they're sitting on their backside all day. Like, that's where it can be a different discussion to my active group. Okay. So it's really important when we think, right, when I'm trying to get you to eat more, what I'm trying to do is make you feel better and less fatigued. I'm trying to make you sleep better. I'm trying to get you to fidget more and get a bit more excited for life. And I think those are the things that I'm really trying to go right. And when we eat more, there's this whole thing is sometimes we don't put on weight. I've seen people that have lost weight when they eat more, because what happens is their body speeds up. I'm not going to dive into that metabolic stuff too much, but body actually goes, right, I'm getting enough food, so I'm going to look after it. And it's those things that are really important to go, right, trust me on this. If we start to eat more of the good stuff, you'll start to understand what I'm trying to get at here. And this is really important when we're thinking about the next step as well. Does anybody have any questions around, I guess, the calorie stuff? Do we have any questions in the chat around that? Sorry, I know it's quite heavy and a lot, but.
Nothing in the chat at the moment.
Cool. So you're listening, so you're learning, which is good. All right, so how do we do that? Okay, well, that's the next question. What does that actually look like? So when we're looking at, I guess, my food groups, and I talked about I like to use food groups and I like to use the plate model. So the food groups that we're working on in terms of building our plate is what we call our protein food group. Okay, so that's obviously gives us calories. It helps us with the muscle regeneration. It also keeps us full, which can be useful in some cases, but could also be negative if we are trying to eat more or struggle to eat more. The next food group is the carbohydrate food group. Now, just ignore the fruit there. It's just the only nice picture I could have found on Canva. But we're thinking like carbohydrates in the context of a plate is kumara, potato. We've got pasta. We've got rices. We've got got beans. You got breads. You got all these things like chickpeas, lentils, legumes, etc. Which these things in the middle here are also what I call protein carbs. So if you are someone who is trying to, I guess, manage their weight, or feeling like they're trying to they might be eating too much, you could actually swap some of the I guess the real starchy carbs for more like bean or protein carbs of chickpeas and that sort of stuff. And what that does is actually increase the satiety of the meal, so it's more fiber, more protein. Again, I'm not going to dive into that too much now, but that's what I'm talking about, my carbohydrate food group. And then obviously it's our fruit and veg and lots of color is really, really important here. Okay. And when we're looking at, I guess, the vitamins and minerals, people often ask the question, should I just take a multivitamin if I can't get that in? it doesn't do the same thing. Our body reacts to vitamins and minerals from food just as good as better than what it would from a supplement. People go, oh, but isn't the soil not that good? We're really fortunate in New Zealand. We have good practices to ensure that our quality of our food is good. I think there are still, I guess, some issues that we can have, but I know that we're pretty lucky with what we get in New Zealand in terms of the quality of the food. So if you have good enough fruit and veggies, you should be ticking all your micronutrient boxes in terms of vitamins and minerals. But this is where we sort of build the plate model. That I know farmers here, and I always have a bit of a laugh when I stand up and go, right, you're only allowed this. You go to the palm of your hand, take your thumb away, that much meat on your plate, and that thick. And it's still with the men, just their jaw drops to see it hit the floor, and it's like, it's all good, I know. Okay, I was brought up on a farm with a 300-gram piece of steak was like a small thing, T-bone wouldn't even cut the mustards. But what we need to understand, like, if you want a big piece of steak, have a big piece of steak. It's just not something we want to have every night because it's about building your plate here. So it's actually just getting in the habit of going, right, that's actually all the protein that I need in a meal. And we'll talk about what those meals look like. But then what you might do, and look, I don't really not too worried about the rest of it. It's just the hand. But what we might look at doing is that carb portion is going to be around about the same as the protein portion as well. And then ideally, for someone that is, I guess, an office day, I'll talk about the next one, we want to go for half plate veg or fruit. So we're always thinking, right, what a complete meal is it's got a protein source, got a carbohydrate source, and it's got a fruit or veg source. Okay. So when we're looking at that as terms of like, okay, how do we change that for how active we are or how busy we are on that day? So you might go, okay, so for more of an office-based day, I might make sure that I have half plate veg, have that little bit of steak or chicken and eggs or whatever that may look like. And then you have a little bit of carbohydrate there as well. Then you may go, oh, I'm a little bit busier. You could have the same meal and add a carbohydrate to that, like a slice of bread or something like that. Or you can completely change the meal itself as well. So it could be that, oh, okay, so on a day that I'm more active on the farm, having a big bolognese meal, with obviously veggies and the bolognese and some mince and that sort of thing is probably going to be a better option on that day versus office day. I could probably have something like a chickpea and rice sort of salad mix with a bit of like nice lean cut venison or something on top. Like it's just changing the way and thinking about what you're going to have on those days for how active you are. Okay. But I'm not going to get too caught up in, I guess, changing the plate. What I like to do is actually just add and take away meals. I think that's an easier way to, I guess, manage it. But when I'm looking at, I guess, complete breakfast ideas, and like these are all these pretty Instagrammable pictures that we always get, and then we get forced down our throat. But I'm very much a messy eater. Funny enough, this is actually not one of my photos. This is actually one of my rugby players, who was very very good. I won't say which one or where he is. Where's my cursor gone? Oh, sorry, back there. But we're always thinking about with these meals. It's like, cool, okay, overnight oats. So I've got oats in there. You could use protein powder. If you want to use protein powder, you could use, yogurt would be just as good. And then you've got milk in there, and then you've got some fruit on top. So you're thinking, right, protein portion is yogurt, or I could do protein powder, possibly both. Then I've got my oats as my carbohydrate source, then I got my fruit or veg. Cool. You got these real fancy things called acai bowls. It's basically like that in a smoothie with some nuts on top. That floats your boat, being my guess. I know some people are into it. I just think it's too much admin, but hey, I'm here to give you some ideas. Then we've got maybe like bagels or toast with, we're looking at things like if you want to do salmon or smoked salmon, you could do egg, you could do, cottage cheese, whatever that looks like for you, like it's just making sure, right, have I got my 3 portions in there? And even just like eggs on toast, add some beans there if you're having a busier day. You might not need the beans on that other day. You could make an omelette like this one here. So that's a lower training day. You're getting heaps of veg in there with a good amount of eggs. Okay, so for most people, like unless you're a very, very small human, 2 eggs might be enough, but we're probably looking at standard about 3, possibly up to 4, and then some can go heavier. The whole 2 egg per day, if you're eating really good food overall, it's not going to be too much of an issue for you in terms of the whole cholesterol thing. Okay. But that's more of a one-on-one conversation if there are any clinical issues. If there's not, don't stress too much about it. Use the eggs. They're a great source of protein. They're cheap. I'm sure most of you have access to those, whether it's at your own house or down the road. So big fan. All right, next one. So when I'm talking about complete snacks, it's kind of we've got this thing, a concept in our mind that, okay, we need to have a snack. And a snack is like bars and a piece of fruit, or it's like chickpeas and hummus. Sorry, yeah, the hummus and crackers or something like that, or hummus and carrot sticks, whatever that may be. For some people, it could be tuna and crackers with some salad. We're thinking a bit bigger option there. For some of you that are more active, that snack starts to turn into a bit more of a meal. So we start going like, actually, a toasty could be an option for my complete snack idea. Yep, there's no fruit in there. You could have a piece of fruit on the side and you're still ticking that box. Here, you've got like your wraps, that sort of thing. You're actually probably getting almost another meal in. And when you're thinking about that differences in the days of that really active day versus the non-active day, it's like you need to start taking more meals. That snack is no longer a snack. It's actually a mini meal or a big meal. And that's the way that you can actually manipulate your diet. You can keep your other 3 meals exactly the same. And if you just increase that meal or you add stuff to that meal, that's the easiest way to do it. Where are we here? And if you're looking for something that's, I guess, a little bit lower, I guess, calorie or high protein, but less other stuff, these are some good options here. And when we get the slides, you can come back and have a look at those. But it's just good to have a little look. I'm not going to dive too much into that anymore. All right. When we're looking at complete lunch ideas, this is what I'm looking at. For most of you, it looks like a dinner. And we can see there, that's sort of palm full of steak. And that's got a good amount of veggies and a good amount of potatoes. So it's like, oh, that's potentially a little bit smaller than what I have for dinner. I'm like, yeah, good. Because we're going to have the same size meal at lunch and dinner, ideally, if you can. Obviously, being on the back of a farm might be a bit harder to have this beautiful meal like that, but you've got to figure it out, which could be something along this line. So a wrap suddenly needs to be like a burrito or something big, and it's a really good meal. Could be like a container full of options there. So it's making sure that when we are going right, my thing that I always say to my clients is, if you wouldn't have that lunch for dinner, you may need to consider improving it. I'm not saying it always has to be a dinner quality meal, but my goal is to aim as close to that as possible if you can more often. Because when are you most active during the day? It's not at 9 o'clock at night. Okay. So if you can get it during the day, you'll find that the balance of your energy will be so much better. You're not coming home and being, and I could swear, but the a-hole to the kids in the afternoon because someone hasn't eaten enough during the day and they're a bit hangry. It's a real term. So this is the thing, it's often because the lunch isn't probably adequate. Okay. Cool. So this is what I often see in terms of a pretty standard breakfast, pretty standard day. So what we do is we have breakfast, which might be a bit of cereal in a bowl. People come to me and they're, oh, what cereal should I have? It's like, actually just make cereal itself's probably not the issue. It's probably what you're having with it. And you can see here it's just lacking fruit, lacking yogurt. Okay. You might have lunch, which is a spread with a couple of slices of bread slapped together. Probably isn't quite a decent lunch option. Then the snack might just be a piece of fruit because you're running out the door and you're just about to grab the kids from the bus stop or whatever that may be. Then suddenly you get to dinner and you're hungry. Okay, you're real hungry. You're not worried about the veggies. You're just trying to get food, and that tastes real good because your body's going, right, I need it. Okay. So then we start adding things like bread to it, and then we go back for seconds. And I can tell you now, you ain't going back for seconds of the veggies when you're hungry, are you? And then the other things that come after that. And it's what we call reactive eating. Okay, is what we see people do when they don't eat enough during the day. They get sugar cravings, they get crashes, they have all these things. They, especially if they've got the kids at home when they're making dinner, they start to eat what the leftovers in the kids' lunch boxes. They start to eat food away on having dinner. Then suddenly they've actually had another meal without them realizing it. Okay, so what we want to do is actively eat more in the right places. And when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at, again, complete breakfast, complete lunch, and you can whack that in a container. That's probably too much meat for my liking, but we'll leave it there and let you do what you want to do with it. Then we're having that extra meal in the afternoon, and then we're going, okay, plate model here. I know that's more of a stroganoff. You can see how you can actually put heaps of veg in there as well, and then you just need a sort of side of a carbohydrate. It's a really good balanced meal. Thinking carbohydrates, protein, and vegetables. And then what you might do, and this is probably for like a moderately active day, like, man, that's a lot of food. But I can tell you now, you'll probably feel a lot more balanced over the day if you start to work on that. And then when you start to go, right, I'm feeling really good, I'm not as tired, I'm sleeping really well, and like, okay, I might start to eat, like, might start to add in things like a smoothie there because I've, been on the horse all day or whatever that looks like. So you might add in that smoothie, and that has your oats and your yogurt, and you have some berries, etc., to make sure we tick in those 3 boxes as well. And we can actually add another meal because we're probably about 500, 600 calories, which is a small meal more than that day, which is a light work day. And that's the way that we start to, guess, manage and make sure that we actually split it over the day. Your body's going to be much, much happier with it. And for this group, we can challenge fasting till the cows come home. Excuse the pun. All right, hydration. Speaking of hydration, I use jugs that are pickle jugs. My wife turns her nose up at it because it's not, but it works a treat. It's great when you take out too. They're hard. Yes. Anyway, enough about the hydration. So best thing to do is check your pee in the morning. Simple as that. Drinking to thirst is the easiest way to manage your hydration. And when you wake up in the morning and you go like, right, I know it's a bit harder for ladies, I'm sorry, but if you notice that your pee's a little bit smelly, it's quite dark in color, you look at the bowl and you go, oh, it's quite dark. You need to reflect and go, did I actually drink enough yesterday? And if you sit there and you go, okay, yeah, I actually did probably have the general rule of thumb, if you want to write this down, 30 mils per kilogram of body weight, or ballpark, doesn't have to be a perfect number, as a really good starting point that I use with my clients in terms of reflection piece. And if it's like, okay, for me, I'm looking about sort of 2.7 to 3 liters of water ballpark. If I'm not hitting that, I go, okay, I need to make sure I hit that. But if you start hitting that and you go, okay, I exercise a little bit, sweat a little bit, I probably need to drink more. But if you're finding you're actually nailing that number and you're just literally just like a tap that's on open all day and you're peeing all the time, you're still waking up dehydrated, that's when we might need to start incorporating things like electrolytes, or you could even just add salt to our meals. That's a super easy way to do it. So if you are more active on the farm, it is hotter, you can definitely use electrolytes. There's obviously electrolytes are really big at the moment. If you need them, that's the challenge. We're still not sure. Definitely during performance and exercise is value. If you're doing something quite sweaty, shearing sheep, riding the horse, whatever that may look like, there's value in using electrolytes there. But it's just determining on, okay, am I drinking enough? But am I drinking enough and still dehydrated? That's where you can start to use that. But I know salt's got a bad rap. The Ministry of Health have actually taken off the upper limit. Salt's all good if you actually are someone who, one, doesn't have high blood pressure. Again, that's probably more clinical conversation. But two, don't be afraid to add salt to your meals if you find you're struggling to retain fluid or you're constantly feeling dehydrated. And that's an easy way to do that. So just use a P chart. It's super easy, super effective. All right. Now, last thing that I wanted to touch on is, I guess, now this goes back to that application. All right, you need to eat a little bit more in terms of fruit or veggies. I didn't actually give you numbers, but the new Ministry of Health guidelines for fruit and veggies now, it's still 5+ a day, but it's actually more like 7 and 8+ a day. So 7 servings of fruit and veg for females. So that's 5 servings of vegetables, 2 servings of fruit. Now, a serving of that is, actually, you can look on their website as well, but half a cup of veggies, a full cup of salad as a veggie, and then just like an apple as a serve, okay? So it's pretty hard to get all that in at just dinner. So it's really important we get that through the day. So 5 servings of veggies and 2 servings of fruit for females. For men, it's 6 servings of veggies and 2 servings of fruit. So it's 8+ a day for men. So it's getting into those habits of how do we actually incorporate that in our day. Those are the Ministry of Health guidelines. If you eat 4 complete meals, you will be ticking that box anyway. That's why I work on that plate model. But it's a really good way to, I guess, set some targets. So what we want to do is actually look ahead and reflect and adapt is really, really important here too. All right. No, sorry, it's gone the wrong way again on me. All right. I like to use this thing called the adult sticker chart. Okay. It's something that I get my 40-year-old men to utilize their, 10-year-old daughter's unicorn chart and put it on the fridge and actually put a little, I guess, chore chart for themselves in terms of habits that you want to get better at. And I think it's kind of based off a thing called 75 hard. And if you want to go look at what that is, to be my guest, I think it's too much. I think it's too hard out. But the concept is actually really good. But what I like to do is actually list, I guess, some habits you want to nail. And then what you do is you tick each day that you nailed that. If you failed, it's all good, because remember, it's part of the learning process. And as competitive nature humans, as hopefully a lot of us are, we give ourselves a score of 7, and you give yourself a score at the bottom of the week, and you go, right, I'm going to improve that week. And if it's something that you continue to nail every single week on week, let's say you get 7 out of 7 for a month, you probably need to, that's probably a habit now. You probably need to integrate something that's going to challenge you a bit more. And that's how you can evolve and utilize this. And the best thing you can do is get that family, that environment involved in this process, and you'll really make some really nice changes in your life. And these are some things that I like to do, and it's not just nutrition. It's about actually creating these habits. So if, getting outside for 30 minutes is probably not going to be an issue for most of you, but it could be the office day that, could be something that's really important. If it is like other movement for you. Could be 30 minutes of just movement, what that looks like. It could be 30 minutes of stretching or 15 minutes of stretching, but something that you can achieve every single day. 10 minutes of meditation or mindfulness, you could stop there and, turn it up or stop somewhere, watch the sunrise every morning. You could do that for a period of time. It's up to you. For some people, it's packing the bag the night before and being organized. And I know for people that can get quite busy on the farm, that's a really easy option there too. You give yourself a target of fruit and veggies, you give yourself a target of fluid, do some reading, give yourself enough time in bed. So you could be like, every night I'm going to be either giving myself 8 hours in bed. If you're asleep, doesn't matter, because people go, I need to sleep for 8 hours. Good in concept, they're going to be nights that you're going to wake up. So kind of, you shoot yourself in the foot a little bit. So what you might focus on is, I'm going to make sure I'm in bed for 8 hours and I've given myself that amount of time. Even if kids come and jump on you and stuff, you're still giving yourself that opportunity. Okay. So it's just like, there's things that you can do every day, and whatever that looks like there, you can do it around the outside as well. So make sure you can discuss that with your group and ways that you can manage that too. Cool. All right. Well over time, as you can see, but if we'll talk through some questions now, but if you do want to find me, those are my contact details. But Instagram's normally quite easy if you want to. I'm pretty inactive there at the moment, but hopefully that should change in the next little while. But it's a good place if you want to tag me and stuff and share stuff with me. I'm always happy to see what everybody's up to. Fills my cup.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mm.
We do have a question that's come through in the chat. It's actually 2 questions, so I'll fire them through separately. So one was tips on high calorie snacks when you're super busy and don't have the time to cook / make all your meals to the ideal.
Yeah, cool. I think it's a good question. Look, at the end of the day, you got to think about, okay, if your base day is good, so you get those 3 meals plus, I guess, 1 snack or what that may look like, then whatever else on top of that is kind of like bonus calories. And if you're active, bonus calories can actually be really useful. And that's kind of going to answer the next question as well, but we'll come to that. So if you get like enough protein, enough veg, and that sort of stuff across the day and get your base really, really nice, then whatever else on top of that is actually not too much of an issue. Sometimes we get caught up with going, oh, if I'm going to add something else onto that, it has to be really fancy and really yum, it's your Sahi bowl type stuff. It doesn't, okay? It just has to be, I guess, food on top of that. So it's just like, I guess, just make sure, I guess, the core foundations are solid, and then whatever else you get on top of that is kind of fair game, okay? And if that means time poor, because it is grabbing stuff out of the freezer or grabbing a packet of biscuits there or whatever that may be, so be it. But I think it's having things like your snacks as kind of your backup option. So having like what I call glove box snacks, so trail mix, protein nut bars, you do roasted chickpeas, even just crackers could be fine. Okay, in the glove box, things that are kind of non-perishable, those could be easy options. If you're an active person, you could actually go for things like creamy rice. You put some jerky in there too, but it depends how well it holds as well. How that makes sense. And then how about
yeah,
sugar?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. No, it's good. Sorry, I should just let you ask me because I think it's been nicer. I just so yeah, sugar's an interesting one. Again, if you're on your backside not doing a lot, sugar can actually be really harmful. I'm not discounting that at all. But again, if you go back to the core of, I guess, good eating, you should be fine. And again, it goes back to, for a lot of people, sugar is actually really important to get enough food on to get them through the day. I think it's the issue is it's when it's the sugar at 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 8 or 9 o'clock at night, where it's a reactive, and because we haven't actually eaten properly all day. So if you're an active human being, if we look at insulin and stuff, again, not going to dive into that too much, but when you're an active human being and you move a lot, you will essentially draw blood glucose and really effectively into your bloodstream. So what that means is that the sugar has less impact on you as an active person than what it would as someone who's sitting on their backside in an office chair all day. Okay, so it's about, sugar's not a bad thing in the scheme of, I guess, getting fuel on, but I think it's how you actually manage that. But again, if we go back to sugar in terms of a meal, so something that so if people like go, I want to have, let's use chicken teriyaki on rice with veg. Now, if you need to use something like a brought teriyaki sauce that is high in sugar to get more vegetables and more protein in, then that actually sugar is probably utilized for positive thing to make food taste really good. Yes, you could make it yourself at home and you could use a low sugar option, but in the scheme of things, that sugar itself is actually not going to have that much of an impact because the protein is going to slow down the digestion and the fiber in there is going to slow down the digestion as well. Okay, so you're better off using something like that to enjoy the good stuff that you need than try to avoid it and then find it put in the too hard basket because you've actually set yourself a goal or a mountain that's just too high. Hope that makes sense. Yeah. And the same with cereals and stuff. It's good to go for lower sugar options in the same category, but avoiding a category altogether because it's high sugar, then so be it. And it's like chocolate. If you like chocolate, the issue is probably having a whole block. Probably not so much in terms of, you know, the low sugar option. So it's about managing, I guess, that around there too.
Awesome. And then that other question that's come through is how important is it to take time to eat rather than always just eating on the run?
I didn't actually touch on this too much, did I? The number one digestive tool that we have that we underutilize is our mouth. As human beings, we're kind of in this world of we need to consume food as quickly as possible because we've got places to be. When we, I guess, consume food really quickly and we don't chew properly, like that's a really important part of our digestive system. Once that goes through there, we've kind of got a soft thing with acid and all the rest of it that's trying to digest it. I'm not saying it does a bad job, but I think that whole thing around actually slowing down and eating where we can, is it bad? Look, if it's the only thing that you can do and that's the way that it fits into your life, it's not the end of the world. But what it also challenges, how can you slow down and actually utilize that? So it could be people go, I'm so busy. I'm like, okay, how much time do you spend on social media? I know we socialize that way. So it's like making sure it's for a positive reason, but it's also like, are you just watching Netflix for the sake of watching Netflix? It's like, what things are you doing in your life that's actually positive for you and what things are being sacrificed? So I guess it's a really nice balance there and understanding that. And it doesn't actually take long to eat. I think it's probably the thing that people do misinterpret. So going back to that, sorry, in summary, chew your food properly because your mouth's a really important digestive tool. And an easy way to slow yourself down while eating is don't take the next mouthful until the last one is done. You'll be surprised, especially when you're having foods like chocolate and chips and the rest of it, that it's just like, I'm a shovel because I'm awful at it. But that's something you could take away and have a crack at.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I had one last question as well. I'm selfishly going to take the space and be like, in New Zealand, we traditionally have quite a, I guess, carb or have had quite a traditionally carb heavy kind of start to the day and lunch. And then we throw in, as you say, like, probably 3 times our actual protein at the end of the day. What are the implications on that, like of having that carb heavy morning, carb heavy lunch on our bodies, on our work performance versus starting the day with that complete meal? Like, how does that
It
show
comes back
up
to that.
being so carb heavy throughout, so much of the day?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It comes back to that whole sugar thing. So a carbohydrate is just a long sugar chain. That's really what it is. So if you're not having anything that I guess is slowing that down, then you can have those spikes in I guess insulin and I guess blood glucose and can have I guess those sort of diabetic related things. But it's also like it's the behavior and actually like because we are, I guess there's so much pressure on us to be really good human beings. Like we need to be thinking well, we need to be sharp, we need to be making sure we're doing all these things. That it comes back to that mental performance. And what I find with people that do, I guess, miss the quality of the food, that we get sort of peaks and troughs of our energy over the day, which when there's so much pressure on us to be a mum or a dad, to be a business owner, or to be a work colleague, or to be a good family person, or all these things. And it's like, okay, are we actually optimizing ourselves and getting the best version of ourselves out? And that's probably what I look at doing. So, what I look at, I think it's probably the implications that happen later in the day and probably the way, I guess, we perform as human beings and then also the way we feel about ourselves, which then come from that too. So if we don't have enough protein with breakfast, don't have enough protein for lunch, then again, it comes to those like sugar cravings, the crashes from a physiological standpoint, but then also we're probably not actually going to be the best version of ourselves that we want to be and hope to be as well.
Awesome. And I am going to let that last question slide on through here around protein targets, because it follows on quite nicely. We see protein targets thrown around on social media everywhere. Do we actually need those amounts, or are we just better focusing on having those 3 to 4 servings of protein in a day?
Yeah, I think we're getting too caught up with the numbers, and to be perfectly honest, it stems from I guess I guess it's very much like the American Australia sort of fitness culture, that we need to eat more protein. Now, we're talking about people that are probably not eating enough food generally. A lot of them are plant-based people, that aren't eating meat. So when you are, I guess, an omnivorous, which means you eat both meat and plants, that I'm sure most of us do, you're going to hit your protein targets fairly easily. I think it's the distribution ideally. Like, number one thing is hit your protein targets, but it's not as excessive as what I guess it's kind of, people always go eat more protein, but it's like in relation to what? And if we were just to slap some numbers on it, ballpark 1.6, 1.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is a sweet spot. And if you train and exercise more, you don't actually need more protein. It's actually more calories and more carbs is what you need. So it's really important that if we just to put some numbers on it, and we think chicken breast, like say chicken breast, 100 grams, you've got about sort of 25-ish grams of protein within that. So it's actually super easy to hit your targets when you're eating meat. I think that comes from a place of, sort of like, I guess, oversimplification of the science a little bit to say more is better. Well, actually, better is better. So I think for this group, this community, biggest thing that I see is probably that protein bolus at the end of the day. You're better off taking that same size piece of steak, splitting it across the day, and you'll be way better for it. You don't need more. It's better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess if you're starting to get in those sort of 4, maybe 5 meals a day, and each of them you've considered having a good protein component, you'll hit the targets there. But it's the fact that we're not we're probably on 3 meals a day, if that, and not complete.
And that's it. And that's probably looking at, you're probably actually, incomplete breakfast, incomplete lunch, and then massive dinner. Or actually, it's just completing those. And we say, 4 with protein. It's like, I guess you probably only need 3 meals plus a protein snack if you need that. And if you have a 5th meal, if it is peanut butter on toast, there's a little bit of protein in there, but it's not a high protein meal. That would be sufficient just to get calories in addition to those 4 meals, because you're already nailing that. So it's like we don't necessarily need more protein when we add in that 5th meal, if that makes sense. It's good.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, we have run over time, so I can't see any other questions come in, but we've got to make sense, so that's brilliant. I guess the easiest way, if people have other questions, they can reach out to you on Instagram or using the contact details there. Otherwise, if for some reason you miss them at all, then fire them through to us at the whole story, and we can put you in touch with Conrad anyway. But lastly, thank you so much, Conrad, for your time this evening. It's been super informative. I've learned heaps, and it's been a really great conversation. So thank you so much for that. And thank you everyone who's here. And for all those listening on the recording, we hope you get a heap out of it too. And lastly, thanks to Beef and Lamb NZ again, the Southern South Island and Central South Island regions for supporting this and making it possible for us to be able to bring these incredible speakers to you. And one last plug for that is our next webinar in the series is in 2 weeks' time with Kane Briscoe from FarmFit. So make sure you come along to that one. But thank you so much for this evening, Conrad.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.